Hello, this is Glue, and this is a video about my experience with a borderline girlfriend. This video will not speak about borderline personality disorder in extreme detail, though I may make another separate video on that topic. I will, however, refer to and describe the DSM-4 and DSM-5 diagnostic criteria of borderline personality disorder. In visual examples, I will be using the DSM-4 as it is easy to navigate in spite of preferring the DSM-5 criteria. Number 1. What is borderline personality disorder? Borderline personality disorder is a cluster B personality disorder characterized by impulsivity and a pattern of instability in self-image, identity, emotion, and interpersonal relationships. It includes components like the compromised ability to empathize with others, the ability to recognize needs and wants of others, which goes under impairments in interpersonal functioning in the DSM-5. It also includes other components like depressivity and hostility in response to minor insults or remarks. I will go over the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria one by one. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. People with BPD often suffer from a hypersensitivity towards abandonment and fear separation from loved ones. They can also, as a result of paranoid ideation and catastrophizing thinking, interpret signs of simple dislike or minor arguments as signs of abandonment or hostile criticism. In the DSM-5, this was split up into slightly different, multiple criteria, with separation insecurity being the most similar to the original. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by extremes between idealization and devaluation, also known as splitting. People with BPD often experience a pattern of unstable interpersonal relationships that are often denoted by idealization and devaluation. Idealization meaning the process of attributing overly positive qualities to another person or thing. People with BPD may place a loved one on a pedestal and feel betrayed when the loved one doesn't meet their projected standards, leading to a defense mechanism called devaluation, or in other words, attributing exaggerated negative qualities to a person or thing. Identity disturbance. Markedly or persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. The unstable identity component refers to thinking positively, highly of oneself in some cases, and negatively in others. It also refers to experiencing dissociative states when under stress, an instability in goals and aspirations, and chronic feelings of emptiness. Some people report feeling like they don't know who they are or what they desire. Some report serious cases of chronic emptiness, saying they feel non-existent, like a spectre drifting through life. This component of BPD may seem similar to dissociative identity disorder, or DID, formerly multiple personality disorder. The symptoms of cluster B personality disorders and DID are similar, according to these two studies, but ultimately can be differentiated by recognizing that DID dissociation is more severe. Impulsive behavior in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging, for example, spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, or binge eating. People with BPD are commonly impulsive in ways that are self-destructive. In my experience, sexual promiscuity, self-harming, exercising, and binge eating were the things I came across most in my friendships and relationships. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-harming behavior. And emotional instability in reaction to day-to-day events. For example, intense episodic sadness, irritability, or anxiety usually lasting a few hours, and only rarely more than a few days. People with BPD will likely experience episodes of sadness, anger, irritability, or anxiety, this being as a reaction to day-to-day common events. This may be in reaction to, say, being teased by a relative at a dinner table, criticism from a friend, or being ignored by a partner. These common events trigger their fear of criticism and abandonment. The last three BPD criteria are chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate intense anger, or difficulty controlling anger, for example, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, recurrent physical fights. Transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. I've already talked about these in my other explanations, so I won't be touching upon them now. Number 2. My experience with a Bpd girlfriend. I went through an intense, unstable first relationship from age 16 until age 17. The girl, who I will call Arya, was my age and was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, among other things. She experienced a number of symptoms like the anxiety and depressivity components, the fear of separation, the identity disturbance, all or nothing behavior, and more. She showed anorexic and bulimic tendencies and often frequented pro-ana blogs, groups and forums, or rather groups of people that were supportive of each other's anorexic habits. They helped each other create customized diet plans, sent each other thinspiration pictures, and created grueling exercise routines. To my surprise, she even explained that others made negative remarks in response to her progress pictures. This was usually to inspire her to become as thin as she desired, and seemed to mirror the words her abusive parents often told her. As Arya was the sole source of my confidence at the time, I felt responsible for her well-being and usually played the therapist or the mediator. This also corresponded with my tendency to play the mediator between my parents. I grew used to being the victim of parentification, or being made to fill the void that an alienating parent left. I likely gained fulfillment from this reversal in roles because I received negative reactions when I didn't adhere to the role I was given. The negative reactions, along with being the victim of harsh criticism early in my childhood, led to me playing the part out of anxiety, which then lowered my self-esteem, which then made me more susceptible to playing the part, as it gave me the confidence I was lacking. This then returned in my first relationship. Arya grew up in a somewhat traditional South Indian family, whose ancestry came from the state of Kerala. Though she lived in a Western country, her family exhibited the rejection of Western love marriages, and wanted their children to go through arranged marriages. I'm not proud of how much this hurt me, but I'll admit that we argued many times over the fact that she was not going to marry someone other than me. This was as a result of her idealization of me, but most of all, I thirsted for her compliments, her flattery, her attention. There are some days where I still feel shame for how infatuated I was. It doesn't make me cry myself to sleep, and I've recovered from the breakup a long time ago, but it was my first relationship, and because it left such an impact, the feelings remained branded on me. She was a lovely girl. She cared for me when I felt depressed, and took time out of her day to talk to me. This wasn't always the case, however. At times she threatened with murder, suicide, and used my deepest insecurities against me. She constantly mentioned to my friends that she disliked me and didn't trust me. I feel as though this is understandable. She experienced multiple relationships before ours that contributed to her distrust of romantic partners. And on top of that, she entered secondary school coming from a dysfunctional family, with little confidence to protect her from rejection. I think the abuse that she experienced at the hands of her parents played a role in this. There is evidence that childhood emotional abuse and neglect lead to the development of BPD symptoms. People with BPD report high rates of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. In Arya's case, she was threatened sexually and physically, and was made to uphold the reputation of her family by maintaining the perfect image her parents wanted. In terms of identity disturbance, she seemed to neglect her own desires for her career and mostly mirrored her parents' desires. She seemed to seek the control and autonomy her parents took away from her in her anorexic tendencies. She also claimed to have multiple personalities, or voices, that she alternated between. Every voice was a single letter in her name and represented a fragment of her identity. One voice was her kind side, one her childlike side. Others represented her violent and harsh sides. It was one gargantuan circus act for me. This also gave her the opportunity to shift blame onto her more naturally evil voices when she demonstrated the impulsivity and anger components of BPD. I felt like she couldn't be held responsible for anything, and I eventually got sucked into her problems to such an extent that I tried to win over every voice, no matter how much they despised and rejected me. In the end, she broke up with me because I didn't understand whether she liked me or not, as her inner life and outer reactions seemed to conflict with each other. This led to me being more passive in the relationship and eventually feeling apathetic and empty. She felt as though she was being abandoned and consequently broke up with me. I don't harbor any resentment towards her. She lives in a mental prison of contradiction. Her inner life and outward expression don't match. It's like she's a prisoner watching as the apocalypse rages outside her cage, carrying the burden of her own impulsivity on her shoulders. She tried her hardest not to get close to anyone because she knew it would hurt both herself and them. That's the one thing that hinted at her truly caring. The whispers of regret and feeling sorry in between the blaring, violent screams. I hope she's okay where she is now, but experience tells me this cycle will repeat many times before either the rope tightens or she becomes self-aware and able to act on her self-awareness. That's all for today. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them as honestly as I can. Thank you.